going to start by getting access to the belts, which are here in the front. I'm going to remove the two clamps holding the air duct between the air filter air box and the intake here. These are Phillips screws attached to clamps. Once you loosen them up, you may have to kind of break them loose a little bit. The clamps will remain on the hose, and keep in mind I've already let the engine cool here, so I can safely reach in here, pull off the hose. There's also a friction mounted hose here in the middle. Just slide it back and forth. Okay, I disconnected this cable here and tucked it off for security. There are 4 bolts here, 14mm bolt here, 2 12mm on the adjuster assembly, and then coming in from the back side on the bottom side is the pivot bolt. I'm going to use a 14mm breaker bar to get this top inner bolt loosened up. This is basically the bolt that holds the adjuster assembly to the frame. Not going to take it off, just going to loosen it up a little bit. Take a 12mm, put my ratchet in, unlock. There you can see on the front face, this bolt that I'm doing on the front releases the tension on the locking assembly on the adjuster being this piece right here. Then I'm going to come and put some slack in it. Okay, the engine is cool. I'm going to reach down around here, find the pivot bolt at the bottom back portion, and then, like I said, from my point of view, it's going to be opposite, righty tighty, lefty loosey, because I'm trying to screw it out toward the back. Okay, I'm loosening all this stuff up here enough that I can rotate and bring it almost completely loose on the slack assembly here. I'm going to rotate far enough in to bring the belt off. Now, the belt's not going to come out of the way because the power steering belt is still on. I just want to get it tucked out of the way. Now, personally, I don't like the way Mazda did this. If you see these two 14mm bolts here, you can see in the back, right down here, is a brace. This is the manifold intake manifold brace. It's a C-channel. Right now the wrench is sort of lined up with the center of that C-channel. At the bottom of that C-channel is another 14mm bolt. We have to remove those 3 14mm bolts. Just aft of these 2 14mm bolts, you can see probably where the tip of my finger comes down. There looks like a notch here. This is a C-channel. I'm going to take this a 2-inch extension. I'm going to stick it. There's a 14mm bolt at the bottom of that C-channel. I'm going to stick it on there. Then I'm going to put my wrench on and break it loose. So I'm going to come in here, come down, and find the 14mm bolt at the bottom. Get that guy set up. My wrench is already set for loosening. I'm going to come down. You can't see it very well, so you got to kind of feel for it. Alright, now I'm going to take 14mm socket, break these top 2 bolts free. And do it like a screwdriver. They're pretty long. Seems like an awful lot of bolt for not a lot of metal. Now you can probably see the intake support bracket kind of wiggling back there as it unscrews this. Alright. Now I'm going to rotate the alternator up and reach back in here. Sort of rotate the intake support.
Okay, here you can
brace.
see the C channel once it's removed, and looking at it from approximately the position that it is, there's the 14 millimeter bolt there at the bottom, so you have to put that socket on, undo it, pull that out, then you pull these two, pull the top two out, rotate it, and pull the part out.
Since I'm going to be pulling the alternator out through this small gap, I'm going to go ahead and take the slack assembly off, which means I've got to release the slack arm, or the adjuster arm, take that 14 millimeter bolt off, undo the lock bolt completely, take the assembly out, and put it back on the new alternator. Okay, you can see right here is the front pulley. Here's the alternator. You can rotate it here. There's an electrical power lead connector and a cannon plug. I'm going to rotate this up a little bit with my right hand, reach down here and loosen that pivot bolt all the way. Now, depending on how tight the pivot was, there's a little sleeve. When you pull the pivot bolt off, the alternator won't necessarily come out without some tender love and care. Now, using a pry bar, we'll look at it in a minute, but there's a sleeve that makes this pivot connection pretty stiff. So just gently have to go in, and when I say gently, I mean everything's relative. You lever it loose. It'll be tight. Now it's loose, so I'm going to set it free.
Okay, there are two electrical connections
That have to be released. First one, got to hold it in place. Got to push in on the release. I believe that's a 12 millimeter bolt. It has a power lead to it, and the other is the cannon plug that goes into the brains. For that, you have to have a screwdriver, a flat screwdriver, and push from the other side. So first I'm going to release that, then I'll come back. This is simply, I'm doing it with a socket, and then you have to turn it. This has a little latch on it, so you have to turn it about 90 degrees to pull it off, even with the bolt off. Okay, you can see I've released the nut that holds the connector on, and then you got to rotate the cable, I don't know, about 45 degrees. In order to get it to release. There's a little plastic lever lock there. Then you got to turn this. Be careful not to crimp the wires here. Got to turn this and release the cannon plug. Okay, it's just normal can plug, but it's not real convenient. And finally, we'll bring the alternator up, rotating it and twisting it as necessary to get it through this gap. Okay, reassembly is kind of the opposite thing. Gotta get this down in there. Be careful not to damage the fan or any of these pipes and hoses. Gonna orient it here so that I can get the power connector back on. Put it in at that little 45, kind of rotate it. Then I'm going to finger tighten the nut on top of it. Okay, then I'm going to reach in and get the cannon plug. Reconnect the cannon plug. Now I'm going to tighten the 14 or I think it's 12 millimeter bolt, and then close the caption or the cover on it, and then rotate it back into position. Okay, you can see I got the cannon plug reconnected here, and have rotated it back and mounted it. I'll talk about the sleeve in another segment of the video. This one's just about perfectly fit, so I'm going to take the 14 millimeter bolt, bring it in, pivot bolt, bring it in from behind. Alright, I put the slacker or adjuster assembly back in. I put the 14 millimeter bolt here to hold the assembly. Then I'm going to rotate the alternator up, put the 12 millimeter lock bolt through here and into the locking mechanism here. So I'm going to line that up a little bit. Line that up. Got to get several things aligned. And once you got it, do the finger snug. Okay, now I'm going to pull the belt over, and I'm going to reseat the belt around the 3 pulleys, the 2 in the middle, and then on the alternator. Okay, you can see here. This is now, the belt is now on. I'm going to sort of put a little tension down here. I'm going to secure the inner bolt. Then I'm going to tighten the slack adjuster arm. Then I'm going to do the lock bolt, and then I'm going to tighten up the pivot bolt. Okay, one little trick of the trade when you're trying to get that pivot bolt tightened. You actually can get a wrench, especially if you have one of those short wrenches, 14 socket in. With that intake brace out of the way, you can come in from behind, slide it over, come forward, and you can work in this direction more efficiently than you can with a socket or a box end wrench. Okay, replacing the intake support. Got to do it, bring it in, rotate it into position. Okay, then you got to put the top bolts in first, otherwise you're guessing as to where it needs to line up. So I'm going to get this front one in where I can see how it lines up. And then I'm going to snug it down. Now you don't want to be super tight, but as I snug down, I'm going to align that second hole. If it's loose at all, the bottom end will sag and you won't be lined up properly. So now comes the second bolt, getting it lined in there. But you don't want to completely tighten it until you've got that bottom bolt in case you need to jiggle it around a little bit. So just snug enough that it really doesn't move too much at all. Then bring the 14 millimeter bolt in from underneath. Follow that C channel down there. Okay, I'm going to finger tighten it as far as it will go. Then I'll put my screwdriver on it, my socket driver on it. Use it like a screwdriver. At some point I'm going to stick the socket down in there. Okay, it looks like it's pretty snug. Stick the socket down in here. Put it into the extension. Snug it down. Now I'm going to snug down the top two. Don't know the torque settings, but they're just, nice and snug. Reconnect my electrical connector over here. Alright, I'll put the air tube back on here, back on the box. Put this friction hose back in the middle. Tighten down my two clamps. Reconnect the battery and take it for a test drive.